Welcome to the Republican Professor. This morning we have with us Jeffrey Tucker. And joining us from Texas, we have Curtis. And I'm in frozen California. I had to put a long sleeve shirt on earlier today. So, Jeffrey, are you in New York? Is that where you're joining us from?
Northeast, undisclosed location.
Northeast. Awesome. So we now have 3 geographical areas that are large and no one knows exactly where we are, but roughly.
We span the United States.
Texas, California, New England. That's good.
Thank you for joining us this morning.
Sure. Well, you know what, before we started here, we were talking about the crisis in academia, which I think is something you are covering here. And you know, we've seen these crises before.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
In the Middle Ages, monasteries made up for all the political chaos and the war and the disease and suffering and starvation by sheltering intellectuals and giving them space and time to write and preserve and innovate, you know. And by the 14th, 15th century, we saw, even earlier, 13th, 14th century, we saw some of the great innovations coming out of these spaces, you know, these sanctuaries for ideas. The very first, I guess you would call sort of modern capitalistic institutions came out of these sanctuary style environments. And there was an ethos that even the most brutal kings, princes or whatever, would never cross the holy space of the monastery. And that was true for many hundreds of years. And you know, the modern versions of the encyclopedia were innovated in that environment, and learning was generally promoted.
I did not know that.
Yeah, well,
about the encyclopedia.
Oh yeah, well, those began in the very first one.
I knew about Martin Luther.
Yeah, well,
getting that Bible out.
The 4th century Saint Isidore actually was a bishop, and I forget now which order of friars he was with, but completed the first dictionary of all known knowledge. Imagine that.
Wow.
And
what a feat.
Yeah, right. I mean, and you know, let's just say he wasn't typing on his laptop.
Right.
You know, you had to have, you know, whole teams of scribes.
To even think of taking that on in an analog world, that's crazy.
Yeah, to say nothing of the 4th century, where you have a extreme paper shortage.
Curtis,
it's impossible to talk like this, but you know, where you don't have ballpoint pens, you know, you have
right
feathers and ink, and you have to make all your own ink, and then your paper you have to let's see, I am not sure if this was written on vellum. I don't think vellum was innovated yet, so it would have been written on papyrus and then copied over and over and over again, because that stuff will fade in 100 years. Anyway, I mean, Saint Isidore did that. Now, he didn't do it alone, right? I mean, so he had a whole team of scribes in the scriptorum, you know, and digging around everywhere, and you know, ancient knowledge, you know, all the aspiration was for all existing science, theology, geography, logic, you know, music. Yeah, I mean,
what were his dates again? Saint Isidore.
We would look him up, but I think we're talking about 4th century.
Oh yeah, that's papyrus. Yeah.
Yeah. So
getting into Europe, it's vellum. You have to have vellum.
Well, that, you know, kind of
before
later,
paper.
Yeah, which is lambskin. You know, it's
right.
stretched and dried.
Yeah.
But anyway, but I guess my point is that we've always needed sanctuaries. And
sanctuaries, yes.
I mean, it's such a good bump forward, way far in history into the middle of the 20th century, where everybody thought that the world was, we'd just gone through a world war, and so there was an impression that somehow everybody was safe, you know. So you had, you know, the Viennese academic circles, you know, where you know, many coffee shop meetings and a stable university environment, and diverse faculty talking about, every subject you can imagine.
Truly diverse faculties, I think is
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah, right. I
Back
mean,
when that term meant something.
intellectually diverse and otherwise, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And then you had the great disaster happen, and that was the rise of Nazism, Nazi ideology in Vienna, and that happened long before the Anschluss, which I think was 36, something like that. But by 33, I mean, you could see the Nazi youth marching around the streets, and the university was already being purged, and it got very scary. So the diaspora of intellectuals began, and they had to flee. And the question was, where do they go? And they couldn't come to the U.S. for various reasons of immigration controls in those days, which is astonishing to think about. But Switzerland was a neutral country, and there were several institutions in Geneva that served as kind of hosts to intellectuals who were fleeing the possibility of political persecution. And well, one of my mentors, Ludwig von Mises, did this, but also Freud too. I mean, it was.
Wait, you studied under von Mises?
Yeah, wish, right?
Okay, hold on.
I just
Let's introduce you. Curtis,
yeah, sorry.
Why don't you introduce our guest this morning?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm acting like I'm giving a classroom lecture.
We just got right into it.
Curtis, please introduce our guest. Thank you.
Well, Jeff, I met you at Acton Institute back in 2003, I believe it was 2003.
It's a long time ago.
5, somewhere around there.
What's the Acton Institute for everybody?
Does
it still exist?
It does.
Okay.
And it promotes a free and virtuous society. That's its mission.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what it is, but some people might not know what it is, and they want to know how to spell it and chase it down. Well, how do you spell it?
Acton was named after Lord Acton.
And what is it? Is it a semester long thing? What is it?
Is
it a weekend thing? What is it?
What they do is a long weekend. It's evolved. When I went, it was a long weekend. I think now they do a week or something like that, and they even have classes. I'm not completely sure of what.
So it's like a conference.
Yeah, and it's peculiar because it generally has, I would say, like sort of libertarian liberal leanings, and the sense that I feel. But it particularly appeals to people with a religious bent and want to integrate religious concerns with concerns over human freedom, that sort of thing. So I've not been able to teach there in a couple of years, but I'm going back this year, and I'm excited because I'm giving a lecture on public health, which is great.
Oh, I wish I could see that one. I'm waiting for that one. So tell us about your academic background.
Oh, it's entirely, economics. I didn't finally finish a PhD, but I did graduate studies and undergraduate in economics, and just fell in love with the discipline, and that's been. And then I went into editorial work and website building and institutional sort of promotion and that sort of thing. Worked at I was good friends with Murray Rothbard. Worked at the Mises Institute for a quarter of a century, really, and then moved on to FEE and AIR, and then finally. This last year founded the Brownstone Institute, which brownstone.org. And I did that because of the crisis in which we live. I really feel like lockdowns and mandates have fundamentally changed everything. I think everybody is blindsided by the powers of the state to just lock everybody down, shut down travel, close churches, close businesses, and issue stay-home orders, and then mandate universal vaccination for everybody in this highly sketchy way, and so we've just been brutalized, and of course it didn't stop there. Along with the lockdowns, we've seen the unleashing of all of this, not just collateral damage, but a kind of, I would say, like nihilism. Has been unleashed in the world, and the political purges began. Those began last year, really, with the censorship and with the driving out of faculty that refuse to be vaccinated, and students too. And so the university is being systematically purged of some of its greatest minds. So this goes back to my little ill-timed discourse at the beginning. I mean, I guess my point is that just when you think you don't need sanctuaries is precisely when you need them the most. And so I really saw the purpose of Brownstone is not just to get good scientific articles out there and good editorials and good really highly competent writing and thinkers to speak to people about the present crisis, but then also to build over the long term something of a sanctuary for ideas and for people who are being purged now.
And that's the mission of the Brownstone Institute.
Right. And I'm nowhere near. I wish I had the resources to absorb all the great minds that are being driven out right now. I don't, but I've been able to take in some, and I think that's the most we can hope for. But it's a brand new nonprofit, and I have to think about keeping us liquid.
Yes.
And just these days to found anything, I don't care if it's a pizza shop or a nonprofit or a church or whatever. I mean, you're going to spend 40% of your time in compliance. So that's what I do. The fact that
you have to keep people safe, Jeffrey. You have to understand. It's really about safety. And in fact, would you guys mind wearing masks during this interview? Just because I'm feeling a little unsafe myself.
Well, this is the land
like
of
you
safety,
were
right?
Well, I started inveighing against all these crazy policies, in the middle of March, 2020. But I was warning about them from January 2020 because I knew lockdowns could happen. I mean, because I had studied the regulations. I almost called them laws, but they're regulations and the plans from the CDC. And also, I had been writing about pandemic planning for 15 years. I mean, all the way back in 2005, the Bush administration had already issued, a pandemic plan that involved stay-at-home orders and business closures and social distancing and this nonsense has been around for a very long time. I mean, when I read it back in 2005, I was like, this is insane. I mean, and in fact, I made a prediction. I said, if anybody ever chooses to do this, they'll permanently discredit a government and unleash, an unprecedented economic and political crisis and cultural and social crisis.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that people have a right to make a living. They have a right they should have a right to liberty, freedom of movement, freedom of association, and freedom of contract, for liberty of contract, where they can engage in commerce to make a living. Now, would you say that that's subject to reasonable regulation, or how would you put that? Would you say that there's no regulation that's allowed for that?
I mean, you're always going to have arguments about those kinds of things,
right?
And that's okay. I mean, I have my own views on this, but what we don't do in any kind of civilized society is shut it all down by executive edict based on some speculation that you're going to stamp out a pathogen. I mean, that is what should be out of the question. I mean, you can't close.
It was speculation, but it was never admitted to be speculation. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, we've never been through anything like this before, and
it was an expert opinion. But they weren't experts. They were just bureaucrats.
Just a handful of people trying out a new experiment on the world. And then it spread. And then the whole world locked down based on this wild, untested theory that they could do better than traditional public health over the course of the 20th century, which had encountered pathogenic threats in 1918, 1929.
How is it different than the traditional, you say traditional public health? I think I know
Mhm.
what you mean by that, but could you
Mhm.
explain it to others?
Traditional public health. So 1918
Yeah.
provided a good example of this because you had two cities, uh, San Francisco and Chicago, that closed schools and mandated masks and generally freaked out. And the experience of that was a disaster. It didn't control the pathogen. All it did is divide people against each other and cause uh, public frenzy that actually distracted from the key thing, which was how do you get people who are sick well? That's sort of what you want to do in the event of a pandemic is focus on, how do you minimize the fatalities?
Right.
That's sort of the goal. And so after that experience in New York, essentially didn't do anything during that 1918 pandemic, and they fared really well. So the lesson there was, all right, let's try to be calm. Let's keep the public calm. Figure out who the vulnerable population is, and you don't know that in advance, right? A new pathogen comes along. You don't
No.
you don't know, but you watch, and then once you get clues, then the idea of public health is that you alert people as to who the vulnerable populations are, and you urge everybody else to live to not panic and live a normal life. And the idea here is that
So
you,
public health is just a function of educating people about
yeah,
what
but
the danger
there's
is,
other
or
there's other things to it
no
also.
orders, no nothing else.
Uh, there might be certain public policies. I'll give you a good example. The idea of public health came about in about the 1880s in England. And so the problem was, what's causing these cholera outbreaks. And so once it was discovered that they could be traced to certain poisoned water supplies, then the job of public officials was to clean them up, So, to look at the commons and make sure that they're not dangerous for people. So that's one job of public authority in that case. But muscling people, especially imposing some weird central pan generated by a computer model, was never part of public health. And so, for the polio,
Or treating healthy people as if they were sick.
that makes no
Because
sense.
you can't, the claim was that we can't tell the difference. So we have to treat everyone as
Everybody
if they're
the same.
sick. And
There was never any basis for
that's
that.
never happened before, as far as I can tell. Would you
No,
say
and
that's fair?
there was never any basis for that. I mean, we knew from January 2020 who the vulnerable populations were. We had a very precise idea. I mean, the data coming out of Wuhan was very clear about this, and the public health response was obvious, which was, since there's more than 1,000-fold difference in the vulnerability of young versus the old, you need to let old people protect themselves from the pathogen while life goes on, and the virus becomes endemic through natural exposure and immunity. I mean, that's just
those data were available right away from China.
They were very clear. Yeah,
the Chinese didn't. Were they giving us all the data?
Yeah,
or
they were pretty pretty
saying,
open in January, and then the government shut down all the clinics. But initially, all the Chinese scientists and researchers were sharing as much data as possible, and we got all the important data we needed to have a good response. But things got confused in February because the most powerful public health officials in England and the U.S. Got distracted by the problem of the origin of the virus, and we can talk about that and how that got messed up. But there was no focus on therapeutics whatsoever. Instead, they launched this wild plan to lock down everybody, and Birx and Fauci persuaded Trump. Trump went along with it, which he never should have. But on the other hand, I wasn't in his position. I don't know what kind of pressures he was under, but regardless, he made a series of catastrophic errors. And then basically he wasn't president from that point on. The deep state took over sorry for the term, the administrative state took over and just ran the country into the ground, into the election. And then once that, then it just kind of went from there. But this is completely contrary to everything we experienced in public health. In 1968-69, we had the Asian flu, which was highly deadly, and also had a much wider impact on demographic impact on the old and young people too. But Woodstock went on as normal, and the flu became endemic through herd immunity, which is a process that was discovered in the 1920s. Herd immunity basically means that you go from pandemic state to endemic state through exposure and resulting population immunity. And that doesn't mean that everybody has to get the pathogen. It means that some percentage have to get the pathogen to reduce the R naught below 1, and then it becomes manageable at that point. So because not everybody has to get sick, what you want to do, intelligent public health does, is alert the people who are especially vulnerable and advise them to stay away from crowds for a little while until the pathogen is passed around and meets everyone. And then our immune systems adapt. And that way we don't have naive immune systems anymore. We can go about life as normal. And you do this as fast as possible to minimize the damage. That was the plan that was enacted in 1940, 41, 42, and 43 with the polio epidemics. And then also in 57, 58 with the Hong Kong flu, and 68, 69 with the Asian flu. And then similarly, but things got a little confused.
Of course, everybody gets, all the kids get polio vaccines now.
Sure. Polio is an interesting case. The Polio Foundation, which is now called the March of Dimes, initially began with great fanfare because one of the strange things about polio is it tended to strike well-to-do upper classes more severely than others, mostly due to level of immunity. So people who were exposed to a lot of germs, they're swimming in the Hudson or whatever, because the working classes tended to have a greater deal of immunity to polio. But when the Polio Foundation, of course, the U.S. president, too, had polio, so that was kind of a big deal.
He didn't. I guess he didn't swim in the Hudson up there in Hyde or wherever he was from.
His mother was a germaphobe,
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he's very much protected, and therefore relative. I'm getting a little out on a limb here, but since this podcast, I can say, but he just had no innate immunity to this, so he got it like a lot of upper class kids did. But they made really riveting pictures. We see a immaculately dressed upper class girl with curly locks, of the age of 12, standing in front of you with steel braces on her legs. It's pretty shocking. So there was a big campaign to find to get the vaccine, and that was great. But there was also a tremendous emphasis at the time. FDR really wanted to help the foundation, and they said to him, not everybody likes you. And the worst thing that we can do to a disease and the public health response to a disease is to politicize it. So they made him stay far away from the foundation because they wanted to raise money just and pursue the public health. Has always been there's been a separation between politics and public health. There always has been. I mean, for good reason, because you don't want to politicize the disease.
So even during the New Deal, where you had the most massive incursion into the economic sphere from the government, and the most massive quick growth of the administrative state up to that point,
right?
Even then, is what you're saying is that people valued economic and liberty of movement and stuff like that, so much so that politicizing a public health crisis like that would have been too far.
They absolutely ruled it out. And And
They
in
hadn't
terms of-
been used to big government yet, I guess is what you're saying, probably.
there was a real strong sense of public health at the time had that it needs to stay away completely from politics because there needs to be a separation between politics and disease mitigation. That was the belief.
Yeah. Okay.
And there were no closures that ever happened. I mean, there was a few. There was a sense at the time that maybe polio was being passed in public swimming pools. So there were some. So when the outbreak would happen in particular towns, they would sometimes people would stop showing up to the swimming pools, or sometimes they were closed. But that's about it. And then other times there were other flus, like in 57, 58. That hit school kids pretty hard. The schools weren't closed. What happened is that
Right.
there's just a lot of absentee, during the flu season. It's like, oh gosh, Bobby's absent today.
What do
Well,
you
he's
say?
back.
What do you say to the obvious criticism from you would get initially would be you just don't care about people. But I mean, a little bit more serious criticism would be something like, isn't the coronavirus, the Wuhan flu, whatever you were to call it, isn't that more deadly than the flus that you're talking about in 58 and Woodstock or what would you say to that?
I don't think we know that
We
yet.
want to transition into cryptocurrency at some point. Just when asked you,
Okay.
that's what we're
Yeah,
doing.
I don't. So I don't think we have an answer to that yet because, first of all, the data from this period is actually really uncertain. We still don't have a clear case fatality rate for seasonal flu, really, even now. But
That's a good point. Yeah.
But going back to 57, 58, we know a lot of people died. A lot of people are hospitalized.
Yeah.
And a lot. And
The flu is still deadly.
oh, it is.
Right.
But what's
Yeah,
interesting is
very
about
deadly.
the demographics here, and again, I don't
Right.
have the charts in front of me, but 57, 58, I think lifespans were maybe 15 years fewer than they are now. So,
yes.
yeah, and same to 68, 69. So to say nothing of 1918, where I think the average lifespan was like 47 or something ridiculous.
Yes. Okay.
So what you have with the SARS-CoV-2 is a virus that's particularly dangerous for people that are living longer than people have ever lived. So you would have to look at 57, 58, 68, 69 and age adjust the mortality and make sure that you've not misclassified the deaths, and then age adjust it according to current population levels. And maybe there's somebody smart enough to pull that off. We don't know. But you're asking an interesting question because every time a new pathogen comes along, people want to know, how bad is it going to be? Well, how bad is it? Well,
Yes.
that is not an easy thing to know, and it's certainly not a priori. You have to kind of
Right.
experience it, and in real time in the fog of war, it's generating infection fatality rates and case fatality rates. And by the way, those are two different things, Mr. Fauci.
Such a basic distinction. I don't know why they couldn't get that. Why were they
And one's
focusing
a little
on
more
cases?
meaningful than the other.
Well, yeah, but now we don't even have these terms. We've lost these terms now because if you look at any of the major databases that are pumping out for 2 years and cranking out information about COVID infections, they call them cases. Well, they're not cases. If you have a positive PCR, that is not a case. A case is when you're sick, and you've got a thermometer in your mouth and an ice pack and and a heater bottle on your head, and you're calling your doctor and you're taking therapeutics. Okay, you're definitely a case. But if a PCR test swirls around in your nose and discovers some bits of virus, that does not make you a case. At best, makes you infected.
I love the way you said that. I love that. Then that makes total sense. It's like, okay, yeah, with the flu, like if I have no symptoms of the flu, why is that a case? No matter what you do with my nose.
Exactly.
I mean, why would I even let you touch my nose? First of all, if I'm asymptomatic,
So
how can I have the flu?
You might not even be infected. So, there's the presence of the
Right,
virus, which, asymmetric, your presence of the virus. So you're probably not passing it on. You're not sick. Okay. You're not sick. All right. You're not infected. You're not sick. You're not a case. Then you've
Basic
got
distinction
infection.
between sick and not sick.
Right. And then you've got, the infection where you actually are infected, but you don't show any symptoms that are discernible, so you're not a case, but cases are genuinely sick. And then there's a huge gap between being a case and being hospitalized. I mean, there's a huge range there. And you know this from your own experience that you can get sick and you're like, I'll get over it. Oh, I'll stay home. I'll sleep this one off. Sleep.
Right.
But then the next day you're worse. Then, Jesus, it's not getting better. Then it gets better. Then it gets worse. And maybe this goes on for 10 days. Maybe it goes on for 2 weeks. And it's at some point in here, you're like, do I need to go to the hospital? You're not sure, but you only kind of go to the hospital once you sort of start feeling scared,
Right.
But there's a huge range between being a little bit sick and going to the hospital, right? So that's where COVID was a very serious thing. So here's the irony. When COVID came out, Crazy Fauci was told the Senate, he said, some people are claiming that this has a 3 to 4% death rate. I don't think it's that high. I think it's closer to 1 or maybe less. Okay. Now, if I said that sentence to a bunch of congressmen, so the only thing you're going to remember is 3 to 4, right? And also, this term death rate is a meaningless term because there's many ways you can calculate death. You're going to do it, per million. Is it a CFR? Is it an IFR? Which is it? He never explained. And so if you're a stupid senator, you're listening to this and thinking, 3% of the population is going to kick the bucket.
What's CFR and IFR for everybody?
I'm sorry, case fatality rate versus infection fatality rate.
Yeah, if I have let's say if I have polio and I'm walking around, I'm fine. Doesn't do anything to my legs. And if that's what most a significant chunk of people with polio, that's how they experience it. That's how most people experience polio.
Right. So the way the CFR and IFR work is that, for example, if you have 1,000 people who are infected and one dies, you're going to get a pretty small infection fatality rate. But if you have 1,000 infections but only 50 cases, and one of those dies, now you've got an infection fatality rate of a case fatality rate of 1 in 50, which is pretty high. So knowing the difference there is really important. And Fauci just kept mixing those up. It's even worse than that. You talk about a death rate. Nobody knows what you're talking about. All right. That's not
right.
IFR,
Yes.
CFR. We don't know what that means. Are you talking about the number of people who are infected are going to die? Or are you talking about the number of people? I'll give you an example of this, actually, where this was just insane. This data stuff's really important. In 2000,
yes.
2005 and 2006, the big threat was the avian bird flu.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And crazy George Bush, who's in
there was a SARS right before that too. In 2004.
2003, 2004. And we can talk about that. That was a strange one because just in brief, it hit the oceanic region, but it never made its way over here. And then the World Health Organization took credit for having controlled the spread of that thing. And that trained them to think, oh, we can do this, which whether that's true or not, we don't really know. But that was a really catastrophic experience just because the public health response was starting to imagine itself that that's sort of hegemonic controls over a pathogen could actually work. But anyway, in 2006, the avian bird flu came along. And Bush was giving these press conferences, prepare to stay home. You might have to close your business. We're going to have the federal government delivering food to your doors, and we're going to end all travel. It was like giving these wild, you marshal all resources in the nation to crush this virus. Well, people were bored. I don't know what was going on in 2006, but he couldn't get any attention from anybody. And it just so happened that that the avian bird flu never made its way from birds to humans. It's actually really funny. But there were two people that were being extremely weird during this period. One was Anthony Fauci, who
Gosh, he wasn't even on my radar back then. Were you
yeah,
following him back then?
no.
Okay.
But you can go back and look at the news reports and see that he was telling everybody it had a because this shows why the stat is really serious. He goes, well, we've seen some early indications that this flu can go from animals to humans, and we have 6 cases, and 3 of them have died. So that's a 50% mortality rate. Thank you, Anthony Fauci. And then there's one guy, one academic expert. I can't remember his name, but academics. So there's one guy who was the one leading world expert in the avian bird flu, and he became a media darling. And he began to give all these interviews, ABC, NBC, saying half of humanity could die from this. Now, obviously it didn't happen. So you have to kind of think about the psychology of it.
Could die. I love the word could.
Yeah, half of humanity could die. So you have to kind of think about this from the point of academic experts who have an extreme specialization. They've been slogging through their whole careers. Well, I wrote my dissertation on avian bird flu. Oh, avian bird flu. Oh, avian bird flu. Here's a paper on avian bird flu. And you've been doing this for decades. Suddenly, avian bird flu is breaking out. And everybody comes to you, you're like, finally, people care about my research. And so you have every incentive to hype it up. And what are you hyping? You're hyping your own importance. That's what you're hyping.
I'm a hammer, and that looks like I think it looks like a nail. What do you know?
That's right.
Well, if I were a crazy person and I had I had a particular sort of hatred against flip-flops, and I've been writing about them for years and years and years, and then suddenly there was kind of an outbreak of blisters. It's like, you see, I've been telling you. See, so
dig up those posts from 2006, right, on MySpace.
So anyway, nothing ever happened with the avian bird flu, and it never went anywhere. And then H1N1 of 2009 was actually a really serious flu year, and it was interesting because Obama was president, but we had a financial crisis.
He bragged about how he handled that,
and I think he handled it very well, actually.
So what did he do right? And was that more dangerous than coronavirus, you think, or Wuhan flu?
No, it wasn't as dangerous as coronavirus. Coronavirus is much worse, but it might have. It was a bad flu year, so it might. I don't know how you compare it with past. Says again, it's like we use these terms: bad, mild, whatever. These have.
What did you like about how he handled that, Obama?
He didn't do anything. I mean, he couldn't do anything because he had a financial crisis to deal with, and everybody was worried about whether or not. They were watching their home values collapse, and they're worried that they weren't getting, they were going to go to their ATMs and not be able to withdraw cash. And Congress was consumed with bailing out all the banks. And the Fed was worried about financial catastrophe, and everybody was distracted with something else. And so when they came to Obama and said, "We got a bad flu year," he's like, "Do you mind? I got a few other things on my plate here." Yeah.
So speaking of financial crisis and inflation and stuff like that, we heard that you know a thing or two about cryptocurrency. Do you want to talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, that's a big jump. Well, let me kind of make the transition in the following way.
Yeah, let's transition.
The transition is as follows, and I'll just tell you a funny conversation I had with my mother a couple of days ago. I said, "Mom, how are things at your grocery store?" She said, "I can hardly afford anything. I swear prices have gone up 50%. It's just unbelievable."
Wow, really?
I can't afford bacon. I can't afford, this rock melon, which I used to have every day. It's now, it's breaking the bank. It's just awful, the food prices. And I said, "Well, how many?" He said, "Well, the same thing's happening to me, right? I mean, it's just incredible. What's happening with food prices. We don't know. I mean, the inflation rate is of food right now. I mean, it's high. But I said, how many people do you think connect the prices at the grocery store and at the gas pump today with the lockdowns of 2020? She said, oh, I don't think anybody understands that. So I thought, well, that's interesting. So I set out over the last 3 days to write what I hope, and I just published it this morning, the definitive sort of article that connects these two things. So, what happened was,
where can we get that article?
Yeah, I mean, I just posted it just now. It's the latest piece on Brownstone.
Okay, we'll link it.
It's really important. It's important. And I mean, you can argue with me about my thesis here or whatever, but it goes kind of like this. We lock down, and then now you can't lock down an economy. Everybody's going to go bankrupt, and it's going to cause disaster, right? So, if we hadn't done anything after lockdowns, all the states would have opened up after 2 weeks and gone on with their lives. But instead, Congress appropriated $2 trillion of money they didn't have. And so suddenly, at all the state levels, the state governors and, the public sectors and businesses even, we're like, hey, we're getting a lot of money out of this. We're getting rich here from these lockdowns. This is not so bad. I've never seen a time. And then that got expanded out to the stimulus checks. So suddenly, they're dropping money into your bank accounts, Well, just giving rough figures, looking back 2 years, Congress appropriated a total of $6 trillion to stimulus payments, and the Federal Reserve created $6 trillion in new money. Okay, so what happens is Congress votes, I'll give everybody money. Okay, there's no money to give anybody. That government doesn't have that money. So what do? They have to create debt. Where's the market for the debt? The Federal Reserve becomes the market for the debt. They're buying the debt. Their balance sheet explodes. What do they buy the debt with? Well, it's the Federal Reserve. The whole point of a central bank is that it has the ability to buy.
Are you saying they can push a key on a computer and then boom, there's a bigger number in some account somewhere or some accounts? How's that work?
The checks of the Federal Reserve don't bounce.
Okay.
So
they create money out of nothing, basically.
That's right.
Okay.
So
that's what I thought you meant.
Yeah, and I'm giving you the numbers based on the money at monetary aggregate called M2, which is the only one I can use right now because they in May of 2020 changed the definition of M1, which is a better aggregate that's more accurate than M2. But the Federal Reserve has not updated its past numbers of M1 with its new numbers of M1, so they're not comparable. So it's kind of useless. So I use M2 because
it's not getting updated.
What's that?
It's so many things from the government aren't getting updated. These last couple of years.
It's just something. So in other words, if I was going to give you M1 statistics, I'd have to run the numbers myself. I don't have time for that. So, but you look at their own charts, M1's now useless. So M2 is the numbers I'm giving you. 6 trillion in new money, 6 trillion in new spending. And oh, what a shock. Now look, there's huge pressure on all the prices. Now this combines with, the problem of broken supply chains, which is a catastrophe. And we're nowhere near fixing it. And then you combine that with war sanctions, and you combine that, with the decoupling of and trade conflicts with China, plus and the tariffs. I mean, you've got a perfect storm of catastrophe. Most of which, 90% of which, dates to the lockdowns. All right. Now the trade problems began 2 years earlier, so everyth's related, right? It began in 2018. Lockdowns happened. Monetary printing. Now suddenly, a package of bacon is $10. So it's this has to be considered part of the harm. Now, you want to talk about cryptocurrency? I've been involved in researching, writing on this topic since 2012, and it's a kind of ledger technology. We were talking about vellum and papyrus earlier, as sort of writing technologies, and the main purpose of those things was to document, not just only to document knowledge, but also to document ownership. But it's really important to be able to document ownership, because that's how you get complicated economic arrangements, so that if I suddenly kicked the bucket, people need to know, well, what did he own? Well, you've got to have documents to prove that, right? Or if somebody's renting something from me and then he claims to own it, I need to have a document to prove otherwise. To have double entry accounting, you have to have documentation. You need to be able to establish who owns what and under what conditions, and that's what gives rise to better economic outcomes. For most of history, that was vellum, and that's how the Medicis did their work, on the vellum, and that's great. But within the 1970s, you had the invention of databases, which is great. So you could just change one entry; you didn't have to rewrite the whole thing, and you could reflow the material based on different entries. And we know that the database revolution of the 1970s was responsible for explosive prosperity in the 80s and 90s and after the turn of the century. I mean, it was remarkable. All Bitcoin did was take that ledger technology and make it distributed so that everybody could own a ledger, the same ledger, and it would all update simultaneously. So you had no one person you had to trust. The ledger was literally unowned by anybody in particular, or owned by everybody at once, so depending on how you look at it. But so an extremely accurate, very fast and secure way of knowing for sure who owned what. And that's the essence of blockchain technology. So the new rare that was established to account to document that ownership right, they called Bitcoin, which itself became a source of value. Initially, I think 1/16 of a penny, and then gradually grew. By the end of 2013, it was $1,000. And I've been writing about this stuff and saying, look, it's not so fancy. This is just a digital method of doing what we've been doing since the ancient world. It's just really efficient. And the ownership units here are naturally valuable because they're scarce, and because they're trackable, and because you can know with certainty who owns what. And it's kind of an advantage that it's not based on trust. So like credit cards are based on trust. Like I have to prove that I'm a sort of a fancy guy who pays my bills in order to get a credit card. With Bitcoin, anybody can trade it with anybody else without going through a financial intermediary, which dramatically lowers counterparty risk.
So it's like gold, is what you're saying?
It's gold, except it's weightless, and you don't have to.
But it's not pretty. The reason people like gold is because they like looking at it.
Well, the problem with being able to look at it is that then you can't. Then to get it to somebody else, you have to you have to send it in the mail. You have to take a car, get on a boat or whatever.
So what is it that people like about Bitcoin besides? I mean, so gold, people like it because it's pretty, but which has the attendant problems that you mentioned about transfer and vulnerability to theft and stuff. But what about Bitcoin though? I don't understand the analogy with gold, just in the sense that, does it do anything? I mean, is there any function? I mean, it's not jewelry. So what is it? What?
It's the ability to bundle up information bits and port them regardless of geography, instantly and very cheaply, and very quickly and very cheaply anywhere in the world without using an intermediary. That has never been achieved before in the history of humanity. So it overcomes all kinds of problems that gold has.
The information bit thing that you mentioned, what value does that have independent of anything? Does it help do something, or?
Well,
I guess that's what I'm missing.
Yeah. So it's an immutable packet of information. I mean, if I had a bubble in my hand that contained some information that and I was the sole owner of this bubble, and I could just kind of throw it up in the air, and somebody within a few seconds in Singapore could grab that bubble in his hand and then open it up. That would be an amazing, that would be an amazingly valuable bubble.
Well, I guess what I'm assuming, okay, so take that example. That's a good example. The guy in Singapore, why would he want that bubble? What's in the bubble that he wants? How does that improve his
it comes
life?
from you and its origin.
Okay.
It's a scarce unit, and nobody else can have that unit, and he can be absolutely certain of that. So, so I think what you're sort of getting at is the important thing, which is that people immediately saw that this technology for securing ownership rights and porting them without without intermediaries, with zero counterparty risk, with absolute certainty that was not censorable and so on, could become a money for a digital age. I mean, you could look at a dollar and say, well, what's that worth? That's just a green piece of paper. Well, it's worth something because it signifies something. And so similarly, Bitcoin was. But now, how much is it worth? That was left to the markets to decide. And initially, for 10 months after its deployment until October of that year, which is 2009, Bitcoin's posted value was zero. And then only later did people realize, oh, this is actually a very useful technology. Okay. So gradually over time, and I think even from 2013 or 2014, I had predicted it was going to become a kind of a safe haven for storage of assets.
Did you say that you predicted that in 2007? I'm not
no,
sure.
2013. 2014. And that's what it's become. When the lockdowns happened, I really expected Bitcoin to soar, and it didn't. It didn't respond very much at all, and I was surprised by that. But once the dust settled and the chaotic world started somewhat approaching normalcy again, there was a widespread awareness that there was one thing that never shut down. They couldn't shut down, and that was blockchain technology. And so sure enough, Bitcoin has actually sustained its value, and then I think the peak price in terms of dollars was 65K at some point, but then it fell, I think, as low as 35, which is not unusual. But now I think it's bumped up again to 42, and now that everybody's panicked, they're wondering. People are using it as a kind of a financial asset now because you know what it's like. I mean, you look at you keep your money in the bank and it's losing 10% of its value.
Yeah.
A year, and you're like, well, I better move into stocks. Well, your stocks are on 7%, we're still down 3%, so you've got to make a 15% return in stocks even to make the old return of 5% because of inflation. So you start to panic a little bit, like, well, wait a minute, am I just destined to get poor here? I mean, what is this? Yeah. And so then people are looking around for other assets and cryptocurrency in general, not just Bitcoin, but many other assets out there in the crypto world are attractive to investors now, especially since there are many assets out there that do things other than just serve as a kind of a neutral money. NFTs are the big thing right now, which I find NFTs to be.
What's an NFT?
That's a non-fungible token. And it's mostly used to buy and sell art online. So you buy an NFT, these things sell for millions, tens of millions. I don't know what the highest price for an NFT is, probably now in the tens of millions. I don't know, but I find the whole NFT market to be utterly preposterous. I don't want somebody's digital painting sitting on my laptop. What am I going to do with that crap? On the other hand, I find the same thing is true about the modern art market.
Well, there you go.
Fair enough.
Yesterday, I was in the mall at Orange County. There's a big mall. It's a pretty well-known mall in Brea, which is North Orange County, and they had a Bitcoin ATM there. I've never seen one before, and it was right there in the food court. I was like, "Whoa, that's strange." So I took a picture of it. Anyway, I thought, the thing with Bitcoin is I'm still not sure I get it. The analogy or the comparison with a dollar bill, for example, is helpful. If I look at some gold and a stack of cash, um, the gold I see as something intrinsically valuable. It's not just scarce. It's something that, I guess we could argue whether it's intrinsic, and that
Where's the
philosophers will
value?
the
Yeah.
philosophers
Okay.
will argue whether it's intrinsic or just a coincidence that so many people like it. I would say it's a good explanation that so many people like it because it has some kind of intrinsic value. But the dollar bill or the stack of cash has something written on it that was written by the United States government, or at least backed by it, and
Mhm.
it's saying that the full faith and credit of this very powerful nation, the most powerful one, the one that the best military, and at least right now, the most powerful economy backs this for all debts. And so that's worth what it is. It's because of what's written on it. But now crypto, Bitcoin or whatever, seems like it's like, okay, if it's just scarce, that doesn't mean it's valuable to me, because there could be like some kind of mineral out there
No,
that
you're right.
doesn't do anything. It's just
You're right.
scarce. It's scarce. It's not beautiful.
Sure.
So what I still don't get it. It's not beautiful. It is scarce, but mere scarcity doesn't seem to be. I mean,
That's
dirt
true.
is scarce. I mean,
You're right.
You wrote an article several years ago about how Bitcoin gets its value,
Mhm.
connecting it with Mises work. Would you want to talk about a little bit about that?
Sure. No, all your questions are reasonable, and you do have to remember that there was a time when Bitcoin had no value at all. Like 10 months went by when it had no value at all. So how did it obtain value? And it's
Yeah.
because it provides a service, and the service is the
Okay.
porting of immutable information packets across space.
And people find that service valuable for some
Yeah,
reason.
yeah. It's a currency that's obtained value because of the services it delivers. That's it, and that makes it slightly different from traditional currencies, which obtain their value by virtue of their barter and the markets. So let me see if I can just quickly explain this. But in a barter economy, you have to trade, eggs for cucumbers and cucumbers for pants, and then, pants for eyeglasses and eyeglasses, and so on. It goes. So it's all direct exchange, but it's difficult when you have a cow, how you're gonna say, well, I'm gonna trade my cow for some pants. It's like, well, how are you going to do that in a barter world? A cow is not divisible unless you kill it, right? So,
Yeah.
so you've got problems of divisibility, portability, drag the cow around,
Yes.
and you've also got non-uniformity of the goods. So, what ends up being most useful for money are the existing valuable goods that are divisible, have a uniform quality, and have a high value per unit of weight, so they're not so hard to carry around. And they're fungible with each other, which is to say that this uniformity leads to fungibility. So there's all these features that feed into why something becomes a money, which is to say a good that you previously valued just for consumption, you now value because for sure you can trade it with somebody for something else. I mean, and this can happen to anything. I might discover that, and it does happen actually. There was a few years ago, there was a tremendous problem with people stealing Tide laundry detergent, to the point that stores had to put them behind lock and key, and nobody could understand what it was. And then some smart person discovered that in drug markets where it was difficult to exchange cash, there's a cash shortage, that people had discovered that you could use this Tide laundry detergent as a kind of a monetary tool. So you get it not because you want to wash your clothes, but because you want to pay somebody for drugs.
Because other people want to wash their clothes.
Yeah. Eventually, somebody's got to wash. Is probably going to wash some clothes, but they don't have to. It just obtains monetary value. The same thing happens in prisons. I had a friend who went to prison, and the money in that prison was cans of mackerel. I think it used to be cigarettes, but now they don't allow that. So there's these cans of mackerel. So you get a haircut and you have to pay a can of mackerel, and so on. And then one day, one of the prisoners went to solitary confinement, and they raided his cell and found his mattress stuffed with cans of mackerel. And the warden,
but you can eat that. I mean, you can't eat Bitcoin though. I mean, so okay. Let me push it a little bit more. Let's say the cans of mackerel are all so old that no one would possibly eat it. And it reminds me of some of the auctions that I go to in the Second Amendment community out here in California, where right now, because Sears and Montgomery Ward used to sell ammunition, but they don't anymore, you can buy at auction old Sears and Roebuck ammunition, which is scarce, not because you want to use it to shoot it, but you want it brings back memories. It's sentiment. It brings back a feeling of yesteryear. And it's the sentimental value that people have when they look at it that makes it valuable, I think. And so
that's slightly different because that's a collectible.
Yes, that's right.
Things. I mean, there's plenty of bills and coins out there that people like.
It's like art. It would be like art then. Kind of.
Sure. But you don't necessarily acquire those things in order to trade them in the future, unless you're kind of
not a true collector. No,
right. But a money is supposed to be rather neutral, and it's like all units are
right.
As best as possible. It's supposed to be uniform quality.
Right. Okay.
I mean, and by the way, that's a descriptive point, not a prescriptive one. So in other words, I'm not saying, this, in order for something to be a money, it has to be this way. I'm saying that that's what we've observed over time.
Okay. I see.
That the most uniform, the lightest, most visible, scarcity figures into this. And there's all these factors. But Bitcoin checks all the boxes, and then also adds, extreme portability and immutability in there.
Do you put extreme portability under the value versus weight consideration?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you can move it to anybody else in the world. And by the way, let me just suggest something too, because we've had these discussions for a good part of 10 years now, and it's what I've found is that people who've never owned or used Bitcoin have a hard time sort of understanding it. You said you were at a thing the other day where you saw Bitcoin ATM.
Yeah.
I mean,
the Brea Mall.
Next time you're there, throw a couple of $20 bills in there and download a wallet. It could be any wallet. I mean, there are thousands of them, and carry it around for a little while and enjoy it. I mean, it's fun. And then
you need a USB for that. What do you need for it? What do you need? Like a flash drive?
No, you don't need anything. You just use your cell phone and hold it up to the screen and scan the QR code and you get your Bitcoin. That's it. So then you carry it around with you. You can watch it go up, watch it go down, watch yourself lose money, watch yourself get rich, depending on what happens. And then once you get bored after a month or two, go to the Brownstone .org and donate half of it to Brownstone Institute. And you'll see it.
I don't think you know how old my phone is. I don't think you know how old my phone is. You should have seen a picture of my phone before you gave me that advice, because I have a payphone in my pocket, and you need to put 10 cents in and it's got a rotary dial, and
Well, that could be a problem. That could be a problem. So yeah, you've got to have a kind of a phone with a camera and that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
By the way, if you want to have a physical Bitcoin, what you can do is,
does it have to be on your phone? Does it go on your phone? I'm sorry, I'm asking such
it
basic
doesn't
questions.
have to. You've got to have some way to capture that.
If I can't explain it to my grandpa, you're not going to be able to explain it to me. He's 99, so he's going to be like, so he's okay. So does it go on the phone? Where is it? Is it just?
So what you're doing, what a wallet is
What if I lose my phone?
Yeah. Okay. If you lose your phone, hopefully what you do is anytime you download a wallet, what the wallet is not really a wallet. It really is just a keeper of a private key, because cryptocurrency uses a double key encryption. So there's a public key and a private key. The wallet holds your private key. That's it.
Okay.
And gives you access to your ownership unit. So when you download your wallet, it's going to ask you to write down a 25-letter code. It's got to be exactly in the right order and that sort of thing. And you write that down and then put that piece of paper somewhere in a secure location. So if you do lose your phone, you can go dig up that piece of paper and then recreate your wallet. You can download any wallet technology and rebuild it instantly just by putting in that code. And if you get shipped out on a desert island for 30 years, or you go to a maximum security prison and you get out,
For embezzlement.
You can always.
So well, the private, that's the private key. The public key, do I have to write that down too? Is that something?
No.
Or where do I put the
public keys are typically these days generated with each transaction.
So if I go to some Bitcoin portal, as long as I have that private key and I put that in, it will know which public key. It'll automatically match it with that public key.
You would never.
I don't know. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. You would never use your private key to Bitcoin portal. What you do is put in your credit card or some cash or something like that, and then download a wallet, and then scan the QR code, and then you'd be the owner of Bitcoin. So, and it goes into your wallet, which is really just a private key holder. And if you lose your phone, then you can recreate that same wallet with your private key, with your letter code that signifies the private key. You can also, if you want to, print out, your Bitcoin on a piece of paper, which is just, a QR code, and stick that somewhere in a secure location, and that's called cold storage. So you can have physical, and you can mail it to a friend who can then scan it and take all your money. So. It's pretty fun. But anyway, I'm going through a lot of links to explain all this, but the best way is just to throw yourself into it and enjoy it.
And figure it out. And you could do it just within, like, with $1, you think?
And
what's the smallest amount that you could get into it if you just wanted to play around with it?
It depends on, I guess it depends on the ATM, but
okay, I got you.
But you don't have to use an ATM. I mean, you can go up to some Bitcoiner in town and ask him if I can, if you can give a quick lecture on philosophy, or dance a waltz, or sell your shoes. He could give you Bitcoin in exchange for your services.
Jeff, one of the questions that I've been dying to ask and kind of explore,
my grandpa would love you, by the way. He would love that part that you just said.
This isn't as practical. It's a little more behind the theory and everything and what's going on. Is, I guess I'll say, what happens as Bitcoin evolves and becomes more and more, permeates itself throughout culture and it gets more acceptance. What happens to things like gold? Because I've always been a gold guy. I've always, I learned about the Austrian school, in
Mhm.
grad school, and
Mhm.
really pursued that a lot.
Mhm.
When Bitcoin came out, I was fascinated by it, but still always like, yeah, but gold. And then I read an article that you wrote, talking about tying it to Mises Bitcoin, tying it to Mises
Mhm.
criteria. And then in that article, you'd also mentioned that sometimes uh, uh, things that are used for money get reduced to commodities. And we see things like silver and gold being used on a commodity level, in manufacturing of all kinds
That's
of
true.
things. And I'm wondering, could there be a reduction of those things to commodities? And does this take over and go into the future? Or is it not working like that?
You're saying if an existing money becomes demonetized and then only obtains its value through its industrial uses or its uses as consumption value.
Correct.
That's happened many times throughout history. I mean, salt used to be money,
Mm-hmm.
and now we just use it as a flavoring. I mean, which is probably good because, you know, I, if you own a home, you sold it for salt. I mean,
Well, it preserved food, and that's really valuable. It makes food taste better, but it preserves food.
or
That's a huge part.
another case is,
In an in a world without refrigeration,
well,
it
that's true, but
preserves food.
those are consumption, whether it's flavor or preservation, or whatever. It's pure consumption, not monetary value. And another case
But
is
it's that's valuable though, as everybody needs
sure,
food.
it's valuable as a consumption good, but not necessarily as a monetary value. Which is to say, you don't acquire it in order solely for the purposes of obtaining other goods in exchange. You know, and
Okay, all right.
that's So another
That's
good
what you mean
example.
by monetary value. Okay.
Yeah, it means that you use it in so-called indirect exchange. Another historical case is the case of wampum, which is sort of the Native American Indians, used wampum for their currency, and then the English settlers came over and said, well, that seems pretty good. So they these were little necklaces made out of sort of white shells, that you could find. And so the English went back, and I don't know, they found some shell farm somewhere and said, oh, yeah, wow, look at this. This is money to these people. It came back and, created a wampum hyperinflation, within a few months. And so demonetized the wampum.
Do you mind if we ask you, feel free to ignore this question if it's too personal, but how did you get into economics? Were you always interested in this since you were a little kid, or
Oh, no.
did you go to college and you were like an art history major and then you took an economics class and you were like, this is it?
No, well, it's almost.
You seem to have a good humanities background. I detect that. So how did you get that training?
Well, so I was kind of one of these kids that was raised to be a certain thing, and by my loving father. So I was raised to be a musician, and became a kind of a child prodigy, a brass instruments player, and.
So in other words, you were tortured as a kid.
No, I loved it. It was
good. But long hours though, right?
Well, yeah, and but the problem was that I got how do I put this? I got too good too soon. So, by the age of 17 or something, I'd already traveled with the Guy Lombardo Orchestra, playing, trombone, that, and I had played with, two of five of the world's greatest players. That had been on stage. I had been, I had the best professors. I was playing with the Texas Tech Trombone Ensemble I had conquered all the literature. I'd played all the hardest possible classical pieces and so on. So at some point I was like,
I'm bored.
Well, yeah, at 17, if you've already done the thing you aspired to do for your whole life, you're like, well, is there anything else I can do? So when I got out of high school early because partially because I just got tired of being the fancy member of the band or whatever. But so I went to college and I was like, I don't know what to study. And I thought I had to have a major right away. So I just kind of went from department to department And, the physical sciences are never quite right for me, although I've really gotten interested in it the last several years. But philosophy seemed kind of dopey. And history, I was like, oh, that stuff's already happened. And psychology, bunch of crazy people. So I saw this department called economics, and stumbled into the dean's office. And I said, I'm wondering if I should study this, but I don't know what it is. And he got up from his desk and gave me this speech about how through economics, the science by which we understand why some nations are rich and some are poor, why civilizations rise up and others are swept away.
The dean was saying this?
Yeah, it was an impassioned speech.
What college was this?
This is Texas Tech. Yeah.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. So I thought, wow, that's exactly what I want to study. So I jumped right into it head first and just gorged myself on the subject and loved it. And I mostly was, taught, old style Keynesian theory, but I thought it was beautiful and fun. And then only later.
Were you a Keynesian at that time? Did you buy?
Yeah, I didn't have an identity. I just did my work,
Mm-hmm. You weren't coming to beliefs yet, or did you?
Oh, no. I mean, Keynesian is just a bunch of,
it's in the water. It's in the water. So you have.
Yeah. But it's just these big aggregates crashing into each other and modeling and that sort of thing. It was all fun.
Okay, I gotcha.
But it was only later, once I discovered sort of the Mises style thinking, that I began to connect my humanities background with my economics. Right. So suddenly the Austrian school is cool.
How much later was that you even heard of that?
Maybe 2 years.
Okay.
2 years.
Was that after college?
No, as well as in college. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Maybe my junior year or something like that. So I threw myself into all that and read everything I could. And it was nice because it's nice to find out that economics is about human beings. That was an amazing discovery.
Yeah. It's not just numbers.
What a concept.
Yeah.
And at what point did you think, I want to go to grad school and get even more leveled up on this?
Well, I went to journalism school after undergraduate, and I did a lot of journalism and writing. And so then I went to work for Ron Paul as his
no kidding, really
research assistant. Yeah. And then after a year or something like that, I decided to go to graduate school. And I enjoyed graduate school, but I kept getting distracted with other things, namely the desire to change the world, and do journalism. And, when you're in graduate school, you need to be like really focused on graduate school. And I just wasn't. So I learned a lot, but I couldn't stick with it. So I just went into what I do now. And
Where did you go to graduate school?
George Mason.
Oh, that's really good. That's one of the best programs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some people say I should have stuck with it and got my PhD. And okay, whatever. You can always look back. But
did you study with Walter Williams?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Oh man, I'm jealous. What was he like as a professor?
Funniest guy ever. Hilarious, brilliant. Yeah. He was very clever, but tough. Yeah, tough teacher.
I've heard he was rigorous. Yeah. Who was your favorite professor?
Donald Boudreau. I really liked him. Took him a class on industrial organization with him, and now, I work with him every day at Brownstone. So he's a good man.
Oh, that's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us about Brownstone. How did that come about? How long has it been in existence?
Well, it's only been in existence. It's in public existence only since August 21, but I began to conceive of it in May, mainly because I realized that the crisis was without precedent in our lifetimes anyway. And I looked at other crises in history, and they portend huge ideological, philosophical shifts. And I looked around at all the prevailing institutions, and I didn't see anybody who responded to this disaster in any kind of competent way. In fact, I thought they were all remarkably incompetent. And that's because they're just so buried in their ideological priors. And when the pathogen came along, they didn't know what to do. They didn't have any theory. The left flopped, the right flopped, the libertarians flopped. And I thought, well, we needed something new to really read the history of and meaning of and philosophical importance of the concept of freedom and liberty into a wider range of topics.
Mm-hmm.
Among which public health. So that's what we've been focusing on ever since. And yeah, 10 million views later, we're doing pretty well.
How did you get the term? How did you get the name Brownstone? I know that that's a type of kind of an old school building in New York City, right? That there's
Mhm.
like 2,000 of them left or something.
Mhm.
Is that how did you get that name?
Well, my initial name was Greek, and I talked to Martin Kuhldorff at the time, and he said, "Well, the problem with that is that Greek is mostly Greek to people." So my next name was Latin, and then another friend of mine said that, I don't know what it is with this name, but it's unpronounceable, and it makes you sound like you're located in Puerto Rico or something. So anyway, it was my mother who came up with the title Brownstone, and the reason for it is that before the age of steel, brownstone was the main building material that was used in the birth of the modern, from about from say 1800 to 1870, the building block of the big cities. And the reason for that is that it was prevalent, but it's also a malleable stone. You can cut it, and it doesn't have a strict grain to it, so it's be cut in many different ways. And I thought, well, this is a good symbol of what I want to do. I feel like in many ways we're starting over. We need to rebuild, and I don't want to be partisan about it. So
Okay, all right.
that speaks to the fact that the stone doesn't have a grain. It's just a building material, and I feel like it symbolizes a certain strength, durability, and tradition, and that's really what I'm kind of going for here. I really we need to get back to fundamentals. Do we have rights, or don't we?
No kidding.
Do we value freedom or not?
Yes.
And by freedom, I mean the ability of people to make their own choices and coordinate their actions with other people, and
Yeah.
develop
Just
communities.
the fact that you felt like you needed to explain what freedom is, that itself is shows how
Now,
far
one of
we've
the
come.
ironies I've always think is that freedom seems, even in America, to be a lost knowledge. We use
this
the
is
word,
terrifying
but
to
we
me.
don't understand it.
Yeah, that's right. So partially what I'm trying to do with Brownstone is publish material that is very engaging on the contemporary scene, that speaks to really deep and eternal philosophical topics in ways that are compelling. And I think it's a long-term process, from speaking from an educational or editorial point of view, but then much larger, going back to our initial conversation, I really do want Brownstone to serve as a kind of a sanctuary in these times where people are being swept out, of public life.
Yeah,
We have to fix that.
that's a great mission.
Well, we're really happy to have you on today. We're glad that you came on. Thank you for coming.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for letting me talk as much as I did, and I've enjoyed it very much.
It's our pleasure.
It's
our pleasure. Yeah.
Well,
Curtis, do you have any? Well, sorry. Sorry.
I was going to say, you let me elaborate great length on a variety of topics in a calm, inviting atmosphere, which is rare. So thank you.
Well, that's our stick. That's what we do. We want the calm. We want people to be in a nervous state of rest and digest, not fight or flight, and definitely not dorsal vagal shutdown, because that doesn't make for a good learning environment. So what we're trying to do is level people up on issues of importance to the nation, and like what you just said, a lot of what you said about Brownstone, I think you said durability, strength, tradition, getting back to the fundamentals. And that's what I'm all about. I saw so many in my party, the Republican Party, that didn't even seem to understand the process by which we certify an election, which is such basic knowledge that they never got it in high school. and they apparently never got it in college. And so
Mhm.
there's so much grade inflation, there's so much censorship, and the censorship really bothers me. The grade inflation bothers me. I think over time it's just I saw firsthand in the classroom when I felt pressure to inflate grades, it just meant that my students learned less. That's what it meant, because they don't study as hard.
Sure.
And they don't study as hard, they're dumber. Because they,
Yeah.
it's not that they're dumb people, it's not that they're stupid, it's that some of this, like playing a musical instrument, requires work. You have to put the work in to know basic things. And so it's a little frightening. I was very concerned, and I think concerned, I'm under saying it, about the last 2 years. In March of 2020 was traumatic for me. I could not believe what I was seeing, could not believe that so many people were going along with this and not asking basic questions. I was horrified by what was happening to small businesses. And I've taught in business departments for 10 years, business ethics and public policy, and I've seen the seniors that I had in the Cal State system at Pepperdine in Malibu. I saw the seniors that are business majors that didn't get it, until they took my class, and but some of even the economic majors weren't getting it, and I know that this is the kind of managers, the kind of entrepreneurs that higher education is squirting out into society, and it really bothers me. So it doesn't surprise me in that sense. It doesn't surprise me what happened, because I've seen just what the students are like and what they're getting. They're not getting stuff in their other classes. I mean, they were getting it in mine, but I'm just one person. So we're trying to do whatever we can to bridge that gap.
Thank you.
Yeah. Curtis, did you have anything else?
I geek out on a lot of things that you write. So we could talk another couple hours as far as I'm concerned. We just don't have the time. Love to be able to talk with you again.
You guys need to have a Bitcoin party. Just, share each other's private keys and just, have some drinks.
That sounds personal.
It does. It did come out a little differently than I meant it. Yeah.
Yeah. Public keys. Yeah.
Public keys. There you go. Gotcha. I don't even know the lingo,
Well, thank you, gentlemen, and let's do it again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best to you.